The first item on our agenda tonight is to approve the minutes of February 20th, 2013. Did anybody have any comments or revisions on those minutes?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That's Anderson and Rosmeyer abstaining. Minutes of March 6th, 2013. Next. Are there any changes or?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to reopening the public hearing on A1313, the mixed-use building standards and conditions. This is continued from March 6, 2013, and this is a proposal to town meeting to amend the standards and conditions for section 3.325 of the zoning bylaw to increase the number of upper floor dwelling units permitted in a mixed-use building by right, allow dwellings on the first floor, and increase the first floor area supporting upper floor residential uses. This is being brought by the zoning subcommittee. So maybe we could catch up on what happened last.
Sure. So we started this last time, as you are aware. I want to call the committee's attention to a couple of changes that were made based on the comments that were made. So in the second paragraph there, the threshold for a special permit is increased to 10 dwelling units, or it's changed to 10 dwelling units. It's originally 6. Our working draft was 12. The planning board decided to go with 10. And then at the end, the last sentence in the last paragraph, no more than 40% of the gross floor area on the first floor shall be used for residential purposes, including not more than 15% associated with upper floors. So that's also the recommendation or the wishes of the planning board reflected in this language. I guess I want to make 2 points. One is that this is not really changing the number of dwelling units that are possible in a mixed-use building. It's changing the threshold at which a special permit is required. And secondly, with regard to the 40%, 15%, the net effect of that is that no more than 25% is actual residence on the ground floor. So just to be clear about that. And again, that would be in the back. That's not changed from previous language.
Thank you, Mr. Croner. Was there further comment from the board on this as it stands? Any concerns, questions, oppositions? Mr. O'Keefe?
I just had one minor question. I noticed the change to remove the term gross floor area and replace that with GFA, and I'm wondering if that's defined elsewhere.
Mr. Tucker?
The subcommittee earlier this evening decided to put, when the first reference to GFA occurs, to write out gross floor area and then put GFA in parens as a way of introducing this. The gross floor area is defined in the bylaw and is used elsewhere in the bylaw, and I think that's why it was being abbreviated here, but just common practice would be that you would start off writing it out.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. All right. I wasn't here last meeting. But I did review the minutes and the changes to this, and I have to say that I'm in favor of it. Was there any more comments from the board before I open it up to public comment? Is there anyone here from the public who would like to speak on this? If not, we could have a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any further discussion on closing the public hearing? Okay, all in favor? And that's unanimous, thank you. Public hearing is closed. Was there any deliberations that we need to make before coming to a vote on whether to recommend this to town meeting? Mr. Croner?
Again, I just want to remind people that this is intended to be paired with the next one, the other public hearing, and that's mixed-use center dimensions. So they're both going towards the same goal. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Mr. Croner. So our options with this zoning amendment are to recommend it to town meeting, to recommend against it to town meeting, or to ask that it be referred back to the planning board for further changes. Does anyone want to make a motion on one of those options? Mr. Crowner?
I move that the planning board recommend the town meeting adopt this amendment.
Second.
Mr. Keefe? Any further discussion? All in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to put that in the list of shortest public hearings, although I know that you all spent a lot of time on it last meeting. We can't begin our next public meeting hearing until 7:30, so I think maybe we should move to the next item on the agenda, which would be the zoning subcommittee report.
Okay, so this will be useful actually because it has bearing on the next article. So, as you know, we have a few other amendments that were in process. And tonight, the zoning subcommittee made some decisions on those amendments that we're going to make some recommendations to you, and so I'll try to explain those. So originally we had wanted to bring a general form-based design regulations forward in tandem with these mixed-use center amendments. It's turned out that working on the form-based design is going to take longer than we expected, even though a lot of work has already been done, because we're now adapting it to be more generalized. It needs some more work, so we're not quite ready. We're not going to be ready for spring. So what we're proposing instead is to bring forward just the last section, which is now 14.5 in your packet there, section on what to do with non-conforming lots, uses, and structures. So most of form-based design regulations talk about how we want the outcome of a development project to look in the end, how it relates to the street, how it relates to other buildings, how it sits on the lot, and so on. There's not a lot of prescriptive language in it. There's some, but not a lot. This section, though, does have a pretty significant prescriptive element, and it has not been changed, and we don't anticipate that it would be changed in any further development of this article. It talks about what happens when you put an addition or expand an existing building that does not conform to what we want our form-based districts to look like. That is, a building that is not close, or is not within the setback range that we're going to be, or that we are going to be proposing to establish. So this section talks about putting new additions up within the setback, even if the existing building is towards the back. We are going to instead propose that this section, or substantially this section, be appended to Article 9 of the zoning bylaw, which already deals with non-conforming uses and structures. So it'll be, it's form-based design regulations, but it fits in the zoning bylaw as it currently is. So we're proposing that to be another article, replacing essentially the form-based design article. And instead, we're going to try and bring form-based design to the fall town meeting, and we're going to try and get it done early, like in September or something. So set an early deadline for ourselves, and that the effect of that would be that it sets the clock back for, or it freezes zoning a lot earlier than the end of town meeting, for instance. So it will freeze, it will require zoning to comply with form-based design if it's proposed within 2 weeks of a public hearing, something like that, right? So that's why we want to do it early. The second thing is, or not the second thing, I guess, we were also talking about possibly doing something with residential parking maximum, adding a maximum number of parking spaces that we've allowed for rental uses. The language is written, first of all, this is something that was talked about, we gather in general, by the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group. It wasn't a specific request of theirs that we try and bring this article, or bring an amendment forward, but it seemed to be their general intent, or their general hope that something would come out. We're not ready to go forward with this article. We think the language is, although it's extremely simple, it is also can be, it might have implications that we aren't ready to explore yet. Furthermore, we also talked about possibly taking a much more thorough look at Article 7 of the zoning bylaw, which deals with parking. There's a section in the original form-based design proposal that talked about parking, and we're thinking that instead of revamping that and putting it in our form-based design guidelines, we're thinking that we'll attempt to revamp Article 7 with form-based design in mind. And so this little section of parking would probably be a part of that. Somehow we'll try to address that. So we're not proposing to bring that forward unless you really want to. And the final thing is the fraternity residence RF dimensions. We're aware that last time around the committee, the planning board was not really enthusiastic about going forward with this. However, we think that it's a very small change. All it's doing in its current form is adding some footnotes to some of the dimensions in the RF column in order to allow flexibility in reviewing a permit application if someone wants to develop one of the properties that are in the RF district. A couple lots on Olympia Drive and potentially 3 lots on North Pleasant Street within the university. If someone wants to develop those in the next 6 months, we would like them to be able to develop it to a much more intense level than is allowed by this bylaw. So we don't want to miss an opportunity here. So we're proposing to make this very minor change, adding footnote A, which allows the requirement to be modified under special permit. That's all it's doing. So we're hoping that you reconsider this, especially in light of the fact that we're not going to be bringing the parking one forward unless you want to. And we're not going to be bringing forward form-based design regulations, again, unless you want to. So, I guess I should also mention, since it's sort of relevant, it'll be part of the public hearing that is ongoing for mixed-use center dimensions. I think the planning board received an email from planning staff discussing recommendations for how to go forward. So we discussed those recommendations, and as you see, we responded to some of them. One of the recommendations was to bring the mixed-use center dimensions forward in a more limited way. We did not agree with that recommendation, I guess is what I want to say. We would like you to consider all of the ones that are currently in the draft. So just so you know, we did review the recommendations by staff, and that's our response. Some of them we liked, and some of them we're not so sure about. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Crowder. Other comments or questions from the rest of the board? I might have a couple. Working backwards, forward, I guess, on the fraternity residence dimensions, which does seem you're proposing to add 3 letters, which is possibly the shortest zoning amendment I've ever seen. And I was wondering whether having the letters under the category name rather than next to the item makes a difference. In the existing bylaw, all the footnotes are listed next to the titles. Mr. Tucker?
For me. Actually, in the existing table 3, they're all over the place.
Oh.
And in this case, I think part of the intent here is to limit that ability to waive or modify, principally to modify a dimensional regulation only to this zoning district and not to make it global across all zoning districts. If you attach it to the dimensional character or type on the left, you have essentially made that the case for all of the zoning districts, and I don't think that's the intent here.
I see.
Is to focus this on the fraternity residence district.
Okay, so I understand now this is out of context, sort of, without all the other columns next to it. Then, sorry, that makes perfect sense. Other questions? Was there oh, yes, Ms. Ford.
Wait. So I will just say that I was one of the ones that expressed some concern about this last time, simply because we had a lot that we were proposing to bring forward. And so in light of the things that are going to be held back until the fall, I would come back on board to support this.
Was it the unanimous view of the subcommittee that we should try to bring this for spring?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems to me, and just looking at it in context of what we're trying to accomplish with zoning and the limited amount of things we can do with zoning, that if there were a place that it would be appropriate for student housing to be built, it would be within the fraternity residence zones. They're not in neighborhoods, and in fact, they're within the university property. So I would certainly support bringing this to town meeting. I think it's a great little fix that does a lot. Anyone else? Then I would propose that we schedule this for a public hearing. And we'll talk about that when we get to scheduling. Was there, so I guess I'll open it.
Can we have feedback on the other thing too?
Yes, so could you just, why don't you list the first one?
The other thing that we wanted feedback on to confirm our recommendation or not is to not bring the full form-based design regulation article forward, but just bring section 14.5 in as a part of Article 9 of the zoning bylaw.
So could you just point us to section 14.5?
So it's the last 2 pages of the, or last 3 pages of the packet there.
Oh, I didn't get, okay, all right, I understand. It's confusing because the figures are labeled 16.5, so okay, yeah. So this would be added into the zoning bylaw.
So Article 9 of the zoning bylaw is called Non-conforming Lots, Uses, and Structures, which is exactly the same title as section 14.5 in this packet. It would presumably be section 9.3. I guess I would say that our deadlines are coming up. The first deadline is next Tuesday, I believe, for when language is due. It would be bad form to try and add language after that date. However, the warrant is not actually signed until April 8th. It would be less bad to put something forward on March 26th and then say, well, forget about it on March 8th. And we would have another chance to discuss this among ourselves on April 3rd, which is our next planning board meeting. So we could ask to have it put on now and then decide next time that we don't want it.
Well, as I recall, this was one of the things, adding some piece of form-based regulations was part of what the zoning subcommittee really wanted to try to bring. And so for that reason, I'm willing to support your bringing that to Springtown meeting. Mr. O'Keefe?
A question, would this be intended to replace section 9.2 or to be integrated into it in some
No,
way?
9.3.
Or 9.3, okay.
There is no 9.3.
It would become a new section, if I may.
Okay, so, but the existing 9.2 already speaks to some of these questions, does it
That's right.
not?
That's right. What this would do, actually, as you're looking at 14.5, what would survive of this would be the first paragraph, 14.50, and then the remainder of the regulations. Everything under 14.500 was designed for the earlier intent of having 2 specific zoning districts in which other rules were going to be overridden. What we're doing in this case is interlocking the 2. This would be in addition to the existing regulations under Article 9.
Mr. O'Keefe, did you identify any specific conflicts between?
No, I was just wondering how substantially the language in this existing section 14.5, which is obviously written in the context of the form-based code, would need to be altered to conform to its new resting place as section 9.3. And there's a couple areas where clearly it's referring to the form-based districts and things like that, and other areas that are not so obvious, like referring to street yard setbacks, which is something that we were originally proposing to define within the form-based regulations, and we would also need to make sure that that was defined, and probably several others as well.
And you feel, oh, yes,
Go ahead.
Ms. Kruger, go
Why
ahead.
don't you finish your thought?
So I was wondering if you feel confident you can make those changes and have it ready to go by, so that we can discuss it on April 3rd?
I think we are, yes.
Ms.
I just
Kruger.
wanted to add just maybe a little more context in why we thought this should come forward now and separate it. And we didn't try to craft the new language, as Mr. O'Keefe and others pointed out. It's not ready for prime time, and so we're sort of begging for a little leeway longer than we might have. We wanted to bring this forward because we felt like it was an important companion to the 2 other articles that we feel very strongly about that we're having the public hearings on tonight. The mixed-use building standards and conditions and the mixed-use center district dimensions. And I know some members of the board have expressed not really wanting to bring those forward unless we kind of dealt with the design regulation component. And we knew that we couldn't do the whole ball of wax well in time for Springtown meeting. And when it came down to it, this seemed to be the part that gave kind of the most prescriptive, the most directive thrust to what might be modified in the two other articles we feel strongly about. The other parts of form-based code, well, or I'm not supposed to call form-based design regulations, while important, are more guidance than prescriptive. So we felt like by pulling out the more prescriptive part and bringing it forward now, we created more comfort level with the other changes that we're recommending in other zoning articles.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger. I see your point. All right. It's time for our next public hearing, which is surprisingly about zoning. This is A1413, mixed-use center district dimensions, which is also continued from March 6th, 2013. This article, which is brought by the zoning subcommittee and the planning board, is to amend Article 6 and Table 3 dimensional regulations and associated footnotes to increase potential density and add flexibility to dimensional standards in the limited business, commercial, village center business, and general business districts. This was discussed to some extent at the last meeting, but maybe someone would like to sort of bring us up to speed. Mr. Croner.
So this is, we have several kinds of mixed-use centers, center zones in town. This proposes to change the dimensional table for each of them in slightly different ways. Primarily what we're doing is changing the front setback minimum to a range that goes from a minimum to a maximum, changing the maximum height that goes from a maximum to a range that goes from a minimum to a maximum. And then a couple other things in each of the ones. Maximum floors, maximum building coverage, adding footnotes to some of these things. Basically, it's allowing a little more intense use in the mixed-use business districts. Again, combined with the previous article, the intent is to allow for more residential use. Really, that's what it is. It is intended for that in those districts. This language that's in front of you is not changed from last time around, with one exception. That's in VVC, the maximum lot coverage. There should be a footnote A next to the 70, not a blank. Other than that, it's all the same as last time around. We also last time talked about, so that's the first three sections of this are the zones. The last section of this is to amend section 6.19, which describes how to calculate the height of a building. In this case, it's maximum height. We're changing it to minimum or maximum height because we now have a range for heights in some of the districts. In that section, we talked about adding some graphics, and we have some graphics to choose from. We have a recommendation, and we hope that you will agree to add that to the article. So the graphics that we like is the last one that's in a box labeled building height. It seems to be the simplest one. They would obviously be adapted for our bylaw, but that will help us understand how we're measuring. Because before we were measuring just to the highest point on the building, now we're talking about measuring to a midpoint on certain kinds of roofs.
Sort of an average
Yes.
on a sloped roof.
If I may,
Yes, Mr. Tucker.
Part of the intent there is that as the subcommittee has actually over quite some time been looking at questions of height and form-based design and the kinds of buildings that now exist in village centers and should continue to exist and be created in village centers, sloped roofs made a great deal more sense, particularly in this climate, particularly given the last couple of days, than do flat roofs. And we did not want the height limitation, the maximum height, to act as a constraint on the ability of people to build buildings in these mixed-use centers that served the purposes, but also had sloped roofs. So this was a way of getting at, and it's also an extremely common way of dealing with height dimensions in zoning. We went looking, as you can see, we found quite a number of examples of this elsewhere.
So as it stands, as the zoning bylaw currently stands, the way that a builder can maximize the building volume is with a flat roof.
Right.
That's correct. And so what this does is to allow some flexibility in terms of the type of roof without, well, in other words, not to provide quite so much an incentive for flat roofs, right?
Yep.
Well, that makes sense. Was there a reason for including RVC?
RVC, I don't think it's, I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, in section 6.19?
Yeah, I mean, the first is all business districts, and then RVC shows up in the height dimensions. Was there some reason for that specific zone as opposed to all the other residential zones?
Well, RVC is part of our mixed-use zones. It's a residential focus, but it's part of a village center zone. It's part of a mixed-use zone.
Other zoning subcommittee comments, or planning board questions about this, concerns, worries? If not, I'll open it up to comments from the public. Ms. Perot. With Keller? I'm sorry, Ms. Keller.
Janet Keller, Precinct 1. And as you know, our compelling interest in North Amherst is having a whole revitalized village with a mix of everyday shops and services. And we are therefore very concerned and alarmed that these changes to the lot coverage and height and adding more floors combined with the fact that these are, as Mr. Crowner pointed out, to increase the residential uses, will foreclose on the mixed-use options. As we know from real estate experts and from the housing production study, 60% of the market is for students, so that, in addition, is another concern. Our experience in that regard, to put it mildly, has not been good. And we're not happy with that. As we understand it, the mixed-use district dimensions, which would be by right, if I understand that correctly, would increase the number of floors and add more height and more lot coverage, and then have a lot of other options in a fairly long list of different increases in all of those things that could be applied for by special permit. So in our view, these are not modest increases. They're basically NAVC all over again, only much more intense than what we had voted down in town meeting previously. I need to beat the drum again on the site limitations of this. I often think when I see this red triangle that it's rightly colored, because red is usually the name, the color we use for danger, but I'm looking at a little map that I made here, and it really brings home to me the site limitations here. We've got the Eastman Brook with its flood-prone conservancy here up against the site on the north. Rural outlying, rural outlying, rural outlying, this crazy little bit of light industrial here. Schwartz Farm with the protected farmland, more protected farmland, protected conservation land in the Pulpit Hill development that I live in. RN, 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 RN. And then down here some RVC, and then here's the National Historic District. And this is wetlands, part of the Great Swamp that's been there for these hundreds of years. Not where I would have, and I know you guys weren't the ones that put it there, not where I would have put a big commercial district with all the intense uses that can bring. And I know that you believe that this will be better for the community, but I must say, when I look at it, I don't see better, we don't see better. We see a lot more intense use. We see the mixed uses in the shops, and the services that we had hoped to get are going to be pushed out by that great surge of demand from the 59% of the market that's, for students, this very heavy residential use. So I hope you won't go forward with this, but I just really need to say that. It seems like NAVC only worse. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Adams.
Maureen Adams, Precinct 10. I wish that the Planning Department and the Zoning Subcommittee, in their wisdom, had seen some way not to include the North Amherst COM in the proposal that you're putting forward. It seems to me that the other uses, the other COM areas and BL uses, make a great deal of sense. And since I know, as we all know, that we need more infill and development for student and rental housing, but we also want it where it's not going to have negative impacts on intact neighborhoods. I feel like a broken record on this. We've talked about this at many sessions. So I can see the logic and the wisdom of what's being done in the East Village District, the Amherst Farmer Supply District, the downtown BL district, which is very near where I live. I think this makes a lot of sense where the zoning is changing. I can see the sense in the University Drive BL district. I reserve comment about Atkins. But the notion that so much of North Amherst in this broad sweep is being swept into this proposal is going to make it very difficult for those of us who support part of it to be able to vote for it without taking it apart. We had this conversation in the zoning subcommittee. I was informed there was no way to take it apart. And I can't believe there isn't some way to separate the wheat from the chaff in this, because you're making some impossible political choices for those of us who, on the one hand, support well-planned infill and development and residential complexes, but do not support they're being built in places where they will have such a negative impact on the residents. So I don't know how you're going to solve this, but I hope you find some way to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Yes.
Paola DiStefano, Precinct 1. I would just like to speak from a very heartfelt position. I've lived in North Amherst for almost 20 years. I had an intimate exposure to what happened at Townhouse Apartments last weekend. And there have been other parties, but this was outrageous. It's 2 blocks from my house. And I do feel that part of the problem is the density there. It happens in houses as well. But because there's so many students there drawing so many other students, it just gets out of control quickly. And it was frightening. It was really frightening. So I anticipate that there will be more of that if there are housing developments built that are as dense as the things that I'm hearing proposed, and that scares me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DiStefano. Does anyone on the board want to comment about anything at this point?
No, no.
Yes, Mr. Croner.
I just want to be clear that the only kind of residential use that's allowed in a COM district is associated with a mixed-use building that has both commercial and residential uses in it. We're not proposing to add apartment buildings or townhouses or anything like that to the COM district.
Yes, Mr. Carson.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that what we're proposing wouldn't be as dense as what was proposed previously because it does have to still have a commercial use. It couldn't be just residential.
Yes, Ms. DiStefano.
It does have a commercial use, but aren't we suggesting that the commercial use be smaller and that the residential use be more dense than what was proposed originally, or what someone would be able to do at present under the COM zoning? Right?
Yes.
It's denser.
But
Thank
you still
you.
have to have a commercial component.
And it's not as dense as last year's town meeting.
We need to, Ms. Jones, why don't you come up to the microphone?
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. Cinda Jones, North Amherst. I assume that it's not as dense as was proposed last year at the town meeting. It's kind of in between or not closer to what's allowed today than what was proposed last year. Thank you. So we've heard talk about real estate expertise and what's possible today. And I'll call myself a local real estate expert, and I have personal experience with the site in question. And I can say that today under commercial zoning, there's zero market for commercial in North Amherst. And the slight increase in residential units allowed will make commercial viable and bring that mix of shops and restaurants that the neighborhood wants. I understand and can empathize with the fear of more people, more traffic, noise, and the potential of students being in a neighborhood that you call home. I had Mr. Kuhn draw the new trolley barn, which is a 4,000 square foot building, 4,000 square feet on the first floor, commercial. We barely could get 10% residential use with an elevator and 2 sets of stairs, so increasing that to 15% would be really helpful. So I appreciate that. But currently, we're only, because of the size of the lot, we're only allowed 4 units above it. So that's on 2 upper floors, 4 4,000 square foot residential units. So those are 3, but mostly 4 bedroom units that are larger each than Mrs. Holden's Cape Cod house next door. And to me, that means you're going to have a lot of party space in a residential unit, and it's not very rentable to many people besides a huge family or a group of students. I would rather be allowed 8 units in the exact same size building, and then I would have 1 and 2 bedroom units. And we did the math. Mr. Kuhn says if the zoning changes, we would have a total of 12 bedrooms. If the zoning stays the same, we would have a total of 14 bedrooms. So I think if you look at things as an example of what's really possible and consider the real impact as number of bedrooms, then this really is a reasonable step to take, and it's not a scary option. In fact, 4-bedroom units of 2,000 square feet each is a scary option for me. The reason why my ancestors settled this part of town 250 years ago, and we've had very intensive, loud, and messy businesses there ever since, is because of the rivers and the mills that we built on them, and the trolley that brought people all around town, and the hard-packed gravel surface, and the want of something better than today. I feel to my gut, and it should return to its greatness that it used to be, and I'd like to help. Finally, the Housing and Sheltering Committee just released a report, and I hope you all have a chance to see the summary, because it says that there is some dire need for housing in this town, and it's low-income housing, and it's elderly housing, and it's family housing, and those things are being displaced by students, and it's a problem. And I think what we'll see in North Amherst, what I hope to see in new buildings being built, isn't a whole bunch of student housing. I'd like to see the Housing Sheltering Committee's needs being met by this. Most of Amherst is already developed. We need to make some hard decisions. There's not much land left. And I think it should go in a place like this. And I just wondered if Mr. Tucker, for the record, could explain in a couple sentences what the master plan directs and how this idea of putting more density in North Amherst Village Center and other commercial districts in town actually does very directly achieve the goals of the master plan.
I think actually Mr. Crowner could do that as well as I.
Sure, if you want me to.
Mr. Cronin.
So the master plan definitely calls for directing development to already built-up areas. And preferentially, that is away from outlying areas. I think the master plan also talks about the long-term sustainability of the town, and to me, sustainability, environmental sustainability, means that you're building in places that are already built, where there's people there, where you can have a mix of residential use and places to shop and places to work. And that kind of development allows for more efficient public transportation, better, more opportunities for alternative transportation, walking and biking. And that lowers the people who live there carbon footprint in a significant way. As well, dense housing reduces the need for heating to a certain extent, and it allows, larger scale buildings allow for more opportunity for rooftop solar, possibly wind. I agree that the master plan also talks about preserving neighborhoods, but there's no possible way to do everything in the master plan. We have to figure out how to best achieve the goals of the master plan, and I think center development meets a predominance of those goals.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. Yes, Ms. Keller.
Janet Keller, North Amherst. If I may, I'd like to have my funny little hand drawing here, well, not hand drawing, taken off the town website with some of my notes in it, entered into the record as well.
Certainly, Ms. Keller, thank you.
There's enough to look on, but not enough for everybody to start. Color copies get expensive. So I've heard the argument again and again about smart growth and sustainability for this area. And I've been reading up on it and reading some of the Orton Foundation work on smart growth in rural areas. And I hear that this is an area that's already built up. And it's true that there is buildup on some of the area. Some of it. What is also true is that the setting, and this was confirmed by the Cecil Group consultants in their charrette report, is 60% low density or very low density. And much of that, as you can see from this, is in farmland or conservation land. It's also sandwiched between these floodplains, and not shown on this map are the extensive wetlands on the west side of Sunderland Road in the what I referred to as the Great Swamp. And for smart growth in a rural or a semi-rural area to be truly smart, we're not talking Columbia Pike in Arlington County here, where the densities are 8,300 persons per square mile. We're talking in the hundreds. With all due respect, I do not see the possibility for transportation companies descending upon us to serve us when we add a few hundred units to these places. What I do see is that a national historic district that the master plan says that we have due diligence to protect is threatened. I do see very architecturally significant, though they're vernacular houses, they're everybody's everyday house, but they're beautiful architectural examples of the life that was here and historic examples. I see those as threatened. We don't have our local historic district yet. We're working on that. Those are unprotected. The National Historic District is unprotected. And so smart growth depends on where, how much, what the impacts will be, and with all due respect, this is too intense for where it is and does not represent smart growth and does not, to me, in my opinion, appear to be sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. So thank you also very much for this diagram, which I know the folks at home can't see, but it will be available in the record. So I also am a North Amherst resident, and so I'll just weigh in. And I have to say that I support easing the restrictions on residential units in the commercial district, as well as the other business districts. There's tremendous housing pressure in this town, as Mr. Croner was saying, and people need to live somewhere, and I see the areas that have been identified in these zones, including the commercial district in North Amherst, as being good candidates for the type of mixed-use development that this would encourage. So I do support this amendment and intend to vote for it when the time comes. Was there any further comment from the board, Ms. Kruger?
Try to be brief. I know when we say more housing, I heard somebody mutter this out there, for students, and I just want to speak from a much more personal perspective. My daughter and her partner Jim and her 2 children live in an apartment in Amherst and pay almost as much rent as I pay for my mortgage for my house. And they need to move. They have another child and they need a larger apartment. And trying to find a 3-bedroom apartment in Amherst that is, and I'm talking affordable for somebody who's, with a decent wage, is pretty impossible. And they're committed to keeping my 12-year-old grandson in the schools. So I see housing options as, for me, whenever that comes up for me, it's much more visceral, and it has to do with families who are having difficulty staying in the town they grew up in. So we're not just crafting these different changes for students. Realistically, we know students are part of our rental market. I don't know all about that, but there are other people who should be able to live here, and that's part of it. And I just want to say, for me, the mixed-use building standard changes that we're proposing have a lot to do with encouraging economic development, which I'm very committed to for this town. And it's rectifying some old zoning that didn't work. That the concept we had for mixed-use development was very good in theory about all commercial on the first floor and these certain limits, and it didn't work. And so we didn't get the commercial development either. It's stifling both commercial and housing, and we need both. So I see it as also a pro-economic development move, and we're fixing some zoning that was conceptual and didn't pan out in today's market, isn't crafted for 2013. So that's why I'm supporting these full throttle.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kruger. Mr. Tucker.
I'd like to slightly repeat something I said last time about the relationship between new development in North Amherst Village Center and all of the things that the Village Center residents want. Many of the requests that we've heard during the design and planning process for the Village Center have been, again, repeated this evening. People want the right kinds of businesses, they want services within walking distance, they want the physical environment to be fixed up, they want some control over the range of kinds of housing that come in, and you cannot have that under the current zoning. The mixed-use building district, or not the building district, the mixed-use building use as a use category, as Ms. Kruger just said, has not worked. North Amherst has not seen a new building of any significance in decades under either previous zoning or under the current zoning. When Steve Cecil was here working on the Village Center effort, one of the things he said more than once in public settings was that in order to attract the uses and the businesses that you want, you have to have a resident population within walking distance at a certain threshold, a certain critical mass. And that critical mass does not exist now, despite the numerous student apartments in the area, which everyone understands are there, and everyone understands are a problem. In order to get from where we are, and where we are is a worsening situation, to where we want to be, we have to allow something to change. Furthermore, the only way that the town is going to be able to afford to do the physical changes, including the intersection improvements and the streetscape improvements and so forth, the town cannot itself pay for that. We need to depend on state and federal grants. State and federal grants are directly tied to and dependent on the existence of smart growth zoning and development projects in the pipeline. They will not give you the money unless they see that there's not only the regulatory environment that allows smart growth to occur, but in fact it's already occurring. So one thing leads to another. We know where I think there's a very strongly shared sense of where everybody wants to go with this. I think the problem is that there is so much fear about what might result from any change that we keep tangling our own feet. think we need to allow something to happen. And this really is, for all that it is fearful, a modest set of changes. It is a set of changes on the margins to the dimensions in some of these zoning districts. It is a set of changes that allows for a more viable use of certain kinds of buildings, the only residential use allowed in the commercial district. And it is, I don't know what, a 16th of what was being proposed before. It is a very small change. Hopefully it will in fact see some result. And then the rest of what everyone wants can flow from that. But unless something changes, the existing situation will only continue to get worse.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. And I'd like to just say that, Ms. Kruger, your point is very well taken. I would love to see some more development in North Amherst. And I see this as a good way to encourage that there and throughout the town in keeping with the master plan. In the interest of time, I think it's time to, we do have an 8 o'clock scheduled, who is here, Dave Zomek's here to speak about the rental regulations, which is very timely. So I think that maybe I'd welcome a motion from someone on the board at this point to close the public hearing or continue it. Mr. O'Keefe.
I move to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? All right, I believe that was, any opposed or abstaining? Okay, thank you, that was unanimous. So again, our options with this amendment are to recommend it to town meeting, recommend against it, or to ask that it be referred back to us for further comment. Mr. Crowner.
There's also the option of recommending parts of it and not other parts of it.
Okay,
So the discussion has been entirely focused on section A, but there's also, or section A1. So there's also section B, which is Business Village Center, section C, which is general business downtown. The zoning subcommittee is comfortable with all of these changes, but we understand that you know, it might be more than people want to do at one time. You know, we just want to be clear that if you vote for this, you know what you're voting for. And of course, we could recommend the whole thing, and it could be divided at town meeting, and only part of it could be voted on. So,
well, I'll speak for myself. I feel comfortable supporting the whole package. I feel like it works together in a positive way, and I'm in support of it. I am hoping that someone on the zoning subcommittee, along with the rest of us, can help to bring town meeting up to speed on this if we recommend it. Ms. Kruger.
If I could just, at the zoning subcommittee, we started talking a little bit about preparing for town meeting with the hope that 2 or 3 members, could be planning board members or zoning subcommittee or any configuration, could have posted meetings that were just working sessions to work on town meeting presentations, so that I think we've gotten a lot of information about what the concerns are, and I feel like it's our job to answer those concerns and articulate our positions for why we support these, and that we have most of the drafting out of the way now, and that we could work in small groups to get ready for town meeting.
Excellent. We have a motion. Mr. Crowner?
I move that the planning board recommend that town meeting adopt the article entitled Mixed Use Center District Dimensions.
I'll second. Go ahead.
You guys can duke it out.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. And many thanks to the public. There's going to be plenty more chance to discuss this at town meeting and before town meeting as well. We now have an appearance from Dave Zomek, who is the chair of the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group. He's also the director of the Department of Conservation and Development. And he is here to present and discuss the residential rental regulations. Mr. Zomick. Take one, pass it.
Giving away my copy. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm joined tonight by two members, actually three members of the working group. I'm sorry, four members of the working group. Ken Rosenthal is with us, Janet Keller, Sandra and Jonathan both were part of our working group, and happy to have their participation and support as we discuss the draft regulations, or excuse me, draft bylaw. What I want to try to do is keep our comments fairly brief. I suspect that the board has a number of questions for us, and we'll do our very best to answer those questions. If during this discussion there seems to be need for us to come back, we're happy to do that in the lead up to town meeting. We want to make sure that information gets out there. I know there are members of the public that I see who have been with us throughout the process as Safe and Healthy Neighborhood, the working group has met. So let's see how far we get tonight, and we'll all try to be sensitive to your time and your agenda. I did want to point out, and I hope that some of you had an opportunity to see some of our material beforehand, but throughout the process, and we've actually been meeting since November of 2012, I think late October actually, all of our materials are available on the town website under the living section, and we have packets of all the draft information, all the emails, any documents that we've used or discussed or edited are all there, so you can really follow a nice progression from where we began to present. And I am going to flash forward a little bit. As you know, the working group was put together by the town manager, John Musanti, bringing us together to really take a look at the broad issue of the condition of our rental properties throughout town. The charge was really twofold: to look at rental properties and potential regulations for those properties, and also to look at the four unrelated bylaw. Very early in the process, it was determined by the group that that second piece was a little bit too large for the time frame we were given, and that was set aside. So really, the group spent the majority of its time talking about rental regulations and working toward where we are today. In your packet tonight is really a very small sample of some of the important documents, and I think some of the more recent documents. I believe, according to Chris, you might have been looking at the draft from March 11th.
That's correct.
The draft that you have today, please note, is the 15th. And that is the draft that essentially is going to be presented to the town manager and for his consideration for inclusion on the warrant coming up for town meeting. So with that, perhaps I could make a few introductory comments. I'd like to then see if Ken and Janet want to add anything, and then I'd like to open it up for questions. And I imagine most of those will be specifically about the documents you have in your packet. Very quickly, I actually included in your packet a wonderful overview that Stephanie O'Keefe included on Monday night for the Select Board. And I'd like to just highlight a few points from that. Stephanie, throughout our process, she was an active member of the working group, was very diligent and extremely helpful with the group, really helping us to organize our thoughts, to organize our process, and really brought us clarity around why we were there, where we were going, how we were going to get there, and some of the outcomes. And I think this two-page document that she provided for the Select Board on Monday night is extremely helpful. And if I could just take a minute to pull out some of the highlights and then turn it over to Ken and Janet. But very quickly, I'm not going to read the entire document, but I think it's very important to identify the reason the group came together and around rental regulations and the desired outcomes. And really, Stephanie has articulated that extremely well in 1 through 12. And let me just pick up on a couple of the highlights there. The group really came together and was all about all of the stakeholders. This was not about landlords, it was not about tenants, it was not about students. It was about what was best for all renters, landlords, tenants, students, renters of all ages. And it was about neighborhoods. It was about people concerned about things happening in neighborhoods that were affecting the quality of life in those neighborhoods. It was to establish baseline compliance with life safety and sanitary codes. The realization that much of our rental stock in Amherst, there are issues, serious issues with the condition of those units. We want to bring those up. It's in the benefit of our community. It's to benefit people renting those units. It's to benefit landlords in the long run because those are investments for landlords and owners and property managers. It was to establish a higher awareness of town bylaws, health regulations, around property exteriors and the general condition of properties. It was to establish parking plans, and really early on that was identified as one of the key pieces that the group focused on, that parking is an issue at many of these rental units throughout town, and we needed to find a way to bring some order to that, and we think we did that through the draft bylaw. It was to establish clarity and understanding around occupancy limits. We didn't delve further into that for unrelated arena, but we did want to establish that landlords understand the rules and regulations and the bylaw in Amherst, and that tenants understand it as well. It was to establish some penalties, and you'll note in our document, in our draft bylaw, there are penalties for certain actions, or in many cases inactions on the part of landlords and property managers. It was to establish baseline awareness of town bylaws, and this was a very important piece to an education piece that we really wanted to educate, communicate, that people need to understand health regulations, zoning regulations, building regulations, fire, et cetera. It was to bring all of these together in one place. It was to have some consistency to all of those. It was also to establish some understanding that to the best of their ability, landlords needed to make every attempt to help us in those situations where we need to gain access, to at least assist code officials in gaining that access. There was a realization that in all cases that's not going to be true with Massachusetts tenant law, and we acknowledge that very clearly in the document. And it was to really bring information together for the community, for neighbors, in one place that is transparent, open, and accessible to anyone that either has a computer or someone who doesn't have a computer could come into town hall. But the idea here is to create a very simple system where everyone needs to register, everyone needs to self-attest, landlords and property managers need to self-attest to a certain number of things, and then they need to provide us with a parking plan. And all three of those documents, including their registration, would be available electronically for anyone to see. So those really, I think, capture the purposes and where we spent most of our attention. We had a saying throughout the process of easy to get and hard to lose. I think in large part that was one of the directions we took. We did, as you'll note, we wanted to make the process, again, easy on the front side, not bureaucratic, not overly complicated or overly expensive for landlords or owners or property managers. Hard to lose, we spent a lot of time talking about penalties, and you'll see we very carefully crafted those sections, and you may have questions for us about suspension, and about the very well-articulated process that we laid out in section 12, 13, and 14, and we may talk about that later. Finally, on the second page of Stephanie's outline, I think it very clearly outlines the registration process, and that landlords would self-attest to the following things. It was very important for us to have an understanding from landlords that they would certify, attest under penalty of perjury that they have done these things in the units that they own or oversee or manage. And then finally, the parking plan, and if there are questions about the parking plan, I may defer to Jonathan in a few minutes. So where are we today? Using all the information and dozens of hours of the working group's time and input from the public, we have a draft that was approved by the group and recommended to be forwarded to the town manager, and John Musanti has taken that under advisement. In your packet also is an outline of an implementation plan and a budget, and with a recommended fee scale for the program. So that is in your packet as well, and happy to take questions on that. So I think I'll stop and turn to my colleagues and see if they wanted to add anything before we take questions.
Would you like a chance?
Sure, I want to say my thank you to not only to all the members of the committee and the staff for an incredible job working with a large committee. You guys are a large committee. This was a large and a half committee, and it was bringing together very difficult policy questions with very diverse and fractionated even within the categories populations who had a strong stake in the outcome of different parts of these. So as you hear all these things, we went through them, and the staff did a fabulous job with them of some of these difficult things around access and how you get that in a state that has a strong, is a strong tenant state. How do you address the behavior, and how do you make sure it's pinpointed, on the one hand, that it's fair and even across the board, on the other hand, that it's graduated so that it really comes to bear when there is egregious failure to comply with what the good landlords do. So I think it's a terrific effort, and I personally am very happy to have voted for it and support it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to add my thanks, along with Janet's, to the public who came to the meetings that we've held, and to the committee for working so hard together. We were very different people with different points of view, and we struggled to try to come forward with a proposal that we thought the town could embrace. We also recognize that this is not the only answer to a solution that brought us together in the first place. Safe and healthy neighborhoods, that's our objective. And we know that that requires the support of landlords and tenants, of owners of their own personal properties, of the University of Massachusetts and the colleges, which are have such an impact on this town. To a certain extent, the university and colleges have made the town itself, the center of town in our neighborhoods, a part of their campus. And as such, they need to take some responsibility for the behavior and the actions that occur on their extended campus. And we hope that they take heed of this, and we hope this is one way to communicate with them too. I don't want to say any more now. We'll have opportunity to answer your questions, so I'll just turn it back to David and you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, any general questions about what we would like any light shed on these regulations? Or should we just go right into questions? I have a question. On the last draft that we had, it was flagged at the top that it included frequent references to requirement for residential permit, but no decision had been made. Could you elaborate what happened after the last draft that header was removed. Is now the permit is required in all cases, or could you explain?
Yeah, I think I'll turn that one over to Jonathan. There was a thorough discussion that brought us last week's meeting. Well, let me turn it over to Jonathan to talk about that subtle issue of whether we at one point were going to exempt certain owner-occupied dwellings and what brought us to have those be included.
Mr. Tucker.
As David just described, there was for quite some time a discussion of who to include, how to include them, whether or not in some instances you would want some rental properties only to register and not have to get a permit and so forth. In the end, it was the consensus of the working group that everything that is a rental should register and obtain a permit, in part because the process, as previously described, is not a burdensome one. Easy to get, hard to lose. It's a relatively easy process to go through, an annual renewal once we've got the system up and running, probably a year and a half, 2 years from now. And so rather than have different categories to keep track of, something simple, something straightforward, and basically all of the properties were included. I did want to say something as a sort of an overall description of what this does. The regulations in the bylaw themselves do only a little bit that's new. What it does is it creates a framework, the registration and permit process, within which the existing housing regulatory tools that are state law, state codes, local regulations, health regulations, local zoning, and so forth, are enforced, and their enforcement is coordinated. So that in addition to the various methods for enforcement under each of those that can go forward, the town has an additional tool to use to help bring properties into compliance. The only really new things that the bylaw would add as regulations, in addition to the system that coordinates everything, are a couple of parking requirements. One, that are founded in public health and safety questions rather than land use questions. One is that all the vehicles on a property be parked on a paved surface. And two, that there be safe access. And this would probably be determined by the fire chief, but that you have to be able to get emergency vehicles to the house. You can't have so many cars parked in front of a building all over the place so that you can't get an ambulance in there, because time matters a great deal when there are medical emergencies or public health and safety emergencies. Those are the only two changes, other than the requirements of getting the permit and the registration, and the fact that we are going to be capturing all of the rental properties that many of which we don't know where they are. Right now, we have a record based on our analysis of the assessor's records and everything else, a total number of 1,575. Those are properties, not units. We suspect there are more, and in fact, we're quite sure there are more, and that they will come in as this process goes forward. The other piece is that it requires a parking plan, and even a very rudimentary parking plan using the GIS as a base and just sketching on where parking is going to go. That gets us light years ahead of where we are now for properties that do not require a land use permit. If a residential use requires a site plan review or a special permit, it's going to have a parking plan anyway as part of the site plan. But there are many properties out there that don't require that, don't require a land use permit, and we have no record or any way of verifying the way in which parking is dealt with on the site, and this will provide that. So in many ways, what this does is fills in a bunch of the blanks, provides an overarching framework for coordinating the way in which we enforce this going forward, and it's a fairly new thing for the town. It's a big step.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Yes, Ms. Kruger.
Well, I had a question for Mr. Zemek and the members from the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods. And first, I want to commend what you've done, because I think it's about time, and I'm very pleased to see this in its current state. And I haven't been at the meeting, so I know you've had discussions, but my question is about the voluntary inspection checklist rather than a mandatory inspection system. And the reason I'm asking about that is I'm concerned about the illegal apartments in town, because illegal apartments are the most dangerous kind of apartments, because they often put people at risk and don't meet health and safety codes. And although Mr. Tucker said, well, we'll find out where more are, we may still not find out where the illegal apartments are when we don't have mandatory inspection. So maybe you could just fill in how you got to the self-inspection solution.
Sure, it's a great question, and if Ken or Janet want to add anything to my response. Yes, I mean, certainly back in 2012 and early 13, the group did spend quite a bit of time, and early drafts, if anyone, as people followed the progression of our thinking and our discussions, early on there was a strong component of inspections, annual inspections. And as we talked about that as a group, as we wrestled with questions of cost, of bureaucracy, but also of walking that line with Massachusetts tenant law, we heard very strong concerns, and we took those concerns of landlords and property managers into consideration, that there is no, our understanding through communication with legal counsel was that in many cases, except in very extreme cases, emergency cases, there's no way to compel access for our code officials. Yes, if there's a public health emergency, if there's some threat to human life, yes, in those situations, our health professionals are building. If roofs are threatened with collapse, et cetera, there's ways to get in. So we were taking in information, and we had two members of our group who spoke very eloquently and are very knowledgeable about tenant law and the practice of renting in Amherst and in Massachusetts. And I think we heard loud and clear that was a very difficult walk for us to do. And so this self-certification idea, which is used in other communities, both in Massachusetts and other states, came more to the fore of a way to attest that, yes, as a landlord, I know that the smoke detectors and the CO detectors in my units are functioning. Check. I have provided all of my tenants with all of the material that the town is going to provide through this bylaw for me for unrelated, on relevant health and other safety and other zoning bylaws, et cetera, in a packet. And yes, the following things have been covered with my tenants. So going through all of those, and actually I believe I included a draft self-certification form in your packet, you can see what that landlord or property manager is going to need to attest to. So we moved from a program that we thought was probably not achievable in the town of Amherst, and we think we've come up with a compromise, but a way of getting compliance and raising awareness, but also raising, we think, the quality of the units in the town of Amherst. Now, it doesn't mean that in those egregious situations or those very dangerous situations that our code officials cannot use Massachusetts state law that they have at their disposal to actually gain access. That hasn't really changed.
They know where they are.
Yeah, they know what they are and how they can do that.
Yes,
I
Mr.
just like to add to the answer. We know that the vast majority of landlords in the town of Amherst are law-abiding and comply with the rules and regulations. We heard from members of the public, who included landlords, that a mandatory inspection system for them might be a little bit excessive from their perspective. And from the town's perspective, it would take a lot of time, energy, and expense. But by self-certifying, they are certifying that what is on that certification is true. And that will be of record and it will be accessible to the public, including neighbors who might suspect that there is something amiss in that property. And they'll be able to see what the landlord says, and they'll be able to see what they know and register a complaint. And at that point, it triggers a process which will expose the wrongdoing, we hope. And that's how we would like to see it work.
Thank you both for explaining that.
If I could add one comment onto that, and that is also throughout the process, and we, Rob Moore, our new building commissioner, Julie Fetterman, Chief Nelson, and Chief Livingstone were all part of the working group. There was a real theme of cooperation. We had John Thompson as our new code official in the building inspection department. And so at various times throughout our process, those officials, Julie and Rob and others, talked about a spirit of cooperation. And just wanted to pick up on something Ken said, that again, the vast majority of landlords or property managers are doing an extremely good job in the town of Amherst. We couldn't really focus, or some people throughout our process even use the word target, and the working group was very careful to back out and away from that, to say, no, this is not about landlord X, Y, or Z. This is about our housing stock in general, broadly. And so the spirit of cooperation, the way that our code officials work now, there were many complimentary stories shared about John Thompson, who's been with the town a very short period of time, that it's really about communication, cooperation up front with clear expectations. What are the town's expectations? What are the landlord's expectations of the tenants? What are the tenants' expectations of the landlord for having potable water and emergency access, et cetera, et cetera. So that permeated our entire process, that really we don't want to ever get to a suspension. In fact, one of the communities that we communicated with, we asked them point blank, they have a similar system with more complex with points, et cetera, and we didn't go that route. Have they ever suspended a permit? And the answer was, in 25 years, they've suspended one permit. In the latter pages you'll see here, it does talk about a very clear and deliberate process, including a new body that would be an appeals body for those situations that might, in those rare instances, reach that point where a suspension might be considered. But again, all of the steps leading up to that are about clear communication, cooperation, and showing that landlords and property managers are taking those necessary steps to make change. And we think that's worked very well for Amherst, and I think it'll continue to work well under this system.
So I'll join the chorus of thanking you for the great work, and also the chorus of complimenting the town staff. So really the point I wanted to make, or the question I have, is regarding upkeep. So I'm actually very pleased to see the part about upkeep, attesting to understand that property must be compliant with regulations regarding snow and ice, trash, upholstered furniture, and yards becoming overgrown. So just an anecdote in my own neighborhood, which is, I was trying to do the math, maybe 40% rentals, mostly owner-occupied duplexes, but a few non-owner-occupied duplexes. But there's a couple of characteristics of those that are not owner-occupied. One is the parking on the lawn and upholstered furniture on the lawn, and the other one is basically leaving the trash and recycling on the curb forever. So with that, so John Thompson has been great. So, I first tried the neighborly thing of contacting the neighbors, then the management company, which is all on the property card, then the owner, all of them saying it's the management, owner says it's management company's responsibility. Management company says it's the tenant's, so the trash stays there, the cars stay on the lawn until John shows up. But so the question is, how do we keep that from happening? The pointing fingers. So that's one question. Another question is, I understand the restrictions about going into the house or into the actual property, but the public space is kind of a different story, like leaving trash to the curb, leaving things basically in the front setback would seem to be a different condition. And so the other thing is that I think most of us just want the cars off the lawn and the trash taken in, and have you thought about the concept of receivership, or the town just doing it and putting, billing the owners, or, because there are communities where if you don't shovel your sidewalk, and I know that there are towns, if you don't mow your lawn, the town will do it for you, and then basically bill you for that.
It's an excellent question, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, members of the working group, but I don't think we considered the whole receivership concept. I will say that with strong assurances from the building commissioner and our health director, we are very confident that we can make change on the exterior, some of the exterior conditions, and in fact, many of them can be seen from the public way. So the access issue is really not a hurdle for our code folks, because many, for instance, trash, uncollected trash or trash collecting for too long is something, Phil Jackson joining us as another member of the working group. So we feel very confident that we can make change, and I know that I've been involved in a couple of situations right on East Pleasant Street where change has happened, both with trash removal, consistent trash pickup and removal, and also with abandoned cars. I will say that one of the changes here is that this clearly gives the code official the ability to fine. So that is one of the early steps as you look at section 12, and that is a daily fine of $100. So this will clearly give our code officials all the ability to fine if they are not getting compliance.
And no one will be able to hide behind the absence of knowledge, because this requires certification that the tenants have been informed of what the town expects, and the owner will be able to make sure that the management firm, if there is one, understands what's expected. So ultimately, it's in the landlord's interest to see that the tenants comply, because the consequences could be severe eventually if it's persistent, egregious, and repeats itself many times. It can affect the ability to actually rent that property. We don't think that a landlord will let the buildup of trash and missed parking lead to that. So we're hoping that this will encourage landlords to behave and get these tenants to behave as well.
Mr. Rosnoy.
I'll join in on thanks for the great work you've all done. It's nice to have a group addressing a need like this. I have a question for you. What would be your response to those who might claim that this imposes an extra burden on landlords and an extra expense, which then might get passed down to the renters, to tenants, or perhaps you don't have a response? I suspect you've considered this.
I'll
I've
start
heard
and
about this generally.
turn it over to my colleagues, but I think we've heard that loud and clear, and I think at every turn, keeping in mind that I remember when this document was many, many more pages long than it is today. I think we've heard that loud and clear, and every opportunity we've tried to make it more clear, simpler, easier to meet the standards that the town may, if town meeting approves this, may move forward on. So we've now got a system where essentially a landlord or a property manager might turn in 3 documents. Really, they might fill out, and our goal here is to have all of this be electronic. So you could do a fillable form at your home or your business that is the registration form. You could then do the self-attestation that you have done all of these things in your unit or your multiple units. And keep in mind, one of the key changes we made as a result of some of the concerns was that whether you own 1 unit or whether you own 21 units, we did this by property. So if you own a property that has 12 units on it, whatever dwelling units, whatever form they might take, we're talking about 1 application for that property where you're self-attesting that all 21 of those units, or pick the number, whatever it is, are all to the standards that the town is asking for. A parking plan, one parking plan for the property. So we had representatives of large apartment complexes, and we heard feedback from people who own one unit that they rent, a single family home in Amherst. One application, one parking plan, one self-attestation certification form signed, and it's a fairly easy process. We think very easy process to do. Once you did it in year 1, in year 2, 3, and 4, unless there were significant changes, the renewal would probably be, are there any significant changes? Check a box, no, send that in electronically, and you will receive a permit from the town of Amherst to rent those units.
So to go back to the question of cost to the landlord or the tenant, there is that possibility that the landlord would elect to just absorb that $100, but in the case they don't, the impact to the tenant would be at most a little over $8 a month. So we felt that it was a fair trade. We've seen what John Thompson has already wrought, and the additional coordination that an administrative person would give and another inspector out there doing similar things to John, the benefit all around to everyone from tenants right on up, certainly seems like a fair trade.
Mr. Jackson.
I know the town government should always come first. I'm sorry. Didn't realize I was single parenting tonight until 8:20, and was like, oh, okay, I have somewhere I need to be. I think that's a great question, and as Dave said, that's one that we considered pretty extensively. So beyond the sort of simple calculation of spreading it out, I don't think that the fee is exorbitant on anyone. I had a very interesting encounter today with several people in town who are longtime sort of renters, now homeowners, who gave me a very interesting perspective on the whole rental situation. And they were describing the situations that they find themselves in as renters in this town, where there's fundamentally no competition. We have people who come in and they pay cash on the barrelhead for properties, and it starts turning an instant profit, and there's absolutely no incentive to reinvest in their property. And I think this will begin to give the tenants not just their responsibilities, but it also begins to enlighten them to some of their rights and what they can expect, especially younger people who've never rented before and don't know that you need a way out of the basement, and you need smoke detectors and all these things that really are leading to these more frequent situations that we're seeing, where something goes wrong in a property and property gets destroyed and people die. So really, our charge here was to look at this more holistic question of safe and healthy neighborhoods. This is just one part of what we all understand is a very multifaceted, multidimensional, very complex problem. This is not a panacea. But I think what it'll do is it will kind of step up everybody's awareness. And we talked about, the idea of to make this repeatable is the first step, right? We have to create this database. And once you have that, once you've stood that up, your ongoing level of effort will begin, hopefully over time, to diminish in some respects. And you hope that enforcement is not a, an ongoing, this is a forever kind of thing. We would hope that at some point in the future, it would be able to really kind of just ease itself, right? We would only be dealing with those rare instances where somebody's not willing to play nice and play by the rules. And so I think that over time, kind of the level of effort that's required will alter that whole pricing equation. So do you need to pay $100 every year from now until the end of time if you're a good landlord? I don't think so, but to start the program up, you have to do something to make the investment. I think the investment is really quite nominal. I don't think it's a big investment on the town's part, so thank you.
So, Mr. Zomick?
I want to leave time for all questions, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't just call your attention to section 12 and 13, and very quickly wanted to highlight section 12 and the very clearly articulated process. There was a question earlier about inspections and mandatory inspections and where the group began. And really, where we are today and what will come before town meeting, and it's important to say this, is a complaints-driven system, a complaints-based system, so that the code official will need to receive a complaint from somewhere, from someone. It could be a neighbor, it could be a tenant, it could be a landlord, it could be any number of people, it could be from another code official. And this bylaw does clearly articulate what process our code official will go through, or officials plural will go through. And that's what I was really talking about earlier, is that early on and front-loaded in this is communication, upfront communication, clear, concise. This is what we need you, the landlord or the property manager, to do. And if that is done, we won't be moving through 1 through 8 and get to possible penalties articulated in section 13. And I did want to call your attention to section 13. We've talked a little bit about suspensions, and the group spent a lot of time talking about what kinds of things could result in a suspension. And we worked hard on this, and I'm very proud of the group. And I think it's very important to look at section 13B 1 and 2. And in those two situations, where the owner or agent has knowingly allowed or assisted in allowing violations of the Amherst zoning bylaw, that is a situation where the code official may choose to move toward a more serious penalty, such as suspension. And then under 2, a responsible party or parties repeatedly refuses or neglects to comply with an order of the code official. And that responsible party could be, that's defined earlier in the document. But I think that's a very important piece as well. Again, the group spent considerable amount of time talking about who is responsible. Are the tenants responsible, or are the landlords responsible? And we grappled with this. We had town council weighing in a number of situations. And so I want to emphasize, and my colleagues may want to add their own comments, that the group really, in my opinion, ended up focusing very, very clearly on that our efforts should be on the behavior of the landlords or the property managers. We're going to give every opportunity for them to correct a parking situation, to correct a life safety situation. But if after repeated attempts, that is not, in the opinion of the code official, progressing, and progressing could take a number of forms, certified letters to tenants, following up on conditions in a lease, or moving in a serious situation toward eviction. Those are the kinds of actions that we may want to have documented for our code official that shows that the landlord or property manager is really taking this seriously and is moving toward correcting a situation that may be caused by tenants. So that's an emphasis point, I think, that is very important, and there'll be a lot of discussion about behavior of tenants, and I think the group really wanted to show that we are looking for action from landlords and property managers. So I don't know if my colleagues want to add to that, but
So Phil Jackson again. So, I mean, I think that what's really important to understand about the bylaw, and sometimes I think it gets a little murky because we've, with one of the earlier drafts, it's very legalistic, right? It wants to define every term, and, it just becomes this sort of ad infinitum thing, and you can't really get to, like, what's it all about. So I think what's important is to understand that there are a substantial number of existing laws, local regulations, and state laws that are brought in under play. So there are enforcement mechanisms and procedures for all of those. So if you have a health code violation, the health department deals with that. If you have a building code violation, then the building inspections folks deal with that. If you have a noise and nuisance house, the police are largely dealing with that. So all of those entities are code officials under this law. So if Chief Livingstone is having a consistent and persistent problem with a particular property, and he the other day acknowledge that there are probably several of those in town, if this law existed today, that they would be moving to take some action because the landlord kind of refuses to do something. And it's really about what does the landlord do in good faith, right? If you end up with, it's kind of a technical term, you guys might not understand it, but if you end up with some real buttheads who live in your house, and you have spoken to them, you've sent them registered letters, you've called their mommies and their daddies, you've done whatever you can reasonably do, and for whatever reason they choose not to comply, you're not responsible for that any more than one of the analogies we heard quite frequently during our discussions was about a rental car. So when you rent a car, you rent the car, and you clearly, accept that the rental car company is not responsible for what you do with the car. You get a ticket, that's your responsibility. So I don't think anybody's suggesting that, some landlord's going to be persecuted because 2 kids drove up on the lawn 3 days in a row and now you're out of business. I mean, it's just extreme in my estimation. So now we have multiple departments that have been trying for years on their own to do things. This now coordinates it, makes it very clear that there's a body of laws. We've only enacted one new thing in this, one new thing, which is the parking plan requirement. Other than that, we're not doing anything that doesn't already exist. There's already a registration bylaw, right? We knew that for 10 years. There's a fee for that, right? We know that, $10. How many people are actually doing it? None. Why? Because there's no consequence if you don't. It doesn't matter. There's no fine. There's no nothing. So all we've done is taken something existing that was very well intentioned that never got off the ground. Julie Fetterman from the health department the other day was saying, well, we didn't have the internet then in 2003. There was no IT infrastructure dedicated to this. There were no staff resources dedicated to it. And I can tell you, it was a spreadsheet on somebody's computer. And that was kind of it. And it was one of 863 things to get to. And if they did or didn't do it, nothing changed. So this just simply centralizes all that, rationalizes it. It will slow deterioration. It's not going to reclaim the town. If you read my column last week, I remember Main Street when it was Main Street. It's not Main Street anymore, and it ain't coming back anytime soon until we get more housing stock that provides an alternative to that. But that's a separate conversation. I think this is a very rational, balanced, coherent thing. The mantra of easy to get, difficult to lose. If you're going to lose your permit, you got to be a hard case. You really got to be a hard case. So I strongly encourage you guys to, adopt this, please, or recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson, and that actually brings me to, it is almost 9 o'clock here, so I wanted to add my voice to the chorus, as Mr. Rosner called it, of support and kudos to the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group for the job you did in such a short period of time, such a diverse group of individuals working together, just fantastic, and the result is in plain English. And I'm just so impressed. So really, thank you so much. It's fantastic, and I support it 100%. It's long overdue, and I certainly support recommending this to town meeting.
Are you looking for a motion, or is it?
I don't know what we need here.
So that we can stand up in town meeting and say the planning board voted
I think that we should have a vote of support for this and a recommendation that town meeting pass it. And I think that's within the scope of what we can do here.
I would be happy to make the motion that the planning board recommend that town meeting adopt the new rental permitting, whatever, it's a residential rental property bylaw, adopt the residential rental property bylaw. So that would be my motion.
I'll second.
Was there any further discussion on this point?
Procedural question. Procedural question. Do we need to have a public hearing for something like this? No, this is not our action. Okay.
All right. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thanks so much for coming in. We really appreciate you.
We appreciate your
keeping us in the loop.
Thanks
Thank
for your
you.
good work.
All right. I'll give it just a second here. The next item on our agenda is some old business. We have Amherst Montessori School having provided, this is site plan review 2012 2/M11396, 27 Pomeroy Lane. We did a site plan review last year, and we asked them to come back on condition 3, which states that in accordance with a letter from Kevin Campbell of KSC Educational Consulting dated January 2nd, 2011, should be 2012, an additional 15 off-site parking spaces will be provided by the applicant by leasing, sharing off-site parking spaces with nearby property owners. Documentation of these parking agreements shall be submitted to the planning board. We have in our packets tonight a letter from Kevin Campbell detailing the arrangements that they've made for the parking and for vehicular access to the school during school hours. We have a map of the parking lots that they are proposing to rent, and we have 2 commercial leases with Slow Body Development Corporation for those lots. We also have a letter to Rob Mora, the building commissioner, from Dr. Alex Galat, the head of school, clarifying that one of the leases is for a unit that will serve as storage purposes only. And we have a copy of the car line arrival and dismissal procedures for the school, which tells us how they get students and staff in and out of the school. So with that said, welcome. Thank you for coming in on this. And just, if I haven't explained anything, please why don't you just introduce yourself and let us know.
I'm Kevin Campbell, the author of that study that you noted.
And I'm Dr. Gilad, I'm the head of school this year.
We have had a chance to review your materials as we receive them in the mail. Were there any questions or comments from the board about whether they've satisfied this condition? Did you have any questions for us?
Not at all. I think at this moment we're just hoping to be clear that we did satisfy the condition.
And we're expecting the certificate to become permanent.
All right, if there's no further questions, I guess we would, Mr. Schreiber?
I did have, this is really not so much about, it's really a question for the one Slow Body property. There's one Slow Body property that has a unit associated with it, and then there's one that doesn't. Is that right?
Yes.
So the one that doesn't, the question is, did that also have a site plan review with a required amount of parking? And by doing this, is it affecting their own site plan review or their own special permit? Because this is parking being used for another property.
I believe that building was built quite a while ago, and I have not seen anything resembling a site plan review for that building. May I also make another comment? When I have been in that neighborhood and have looked at that parking lot, I never see that it is full. I often see cars in the front of the building, but I hardly ever see cars in the back. So I think that there is ample space for 10 cars from the Montessori school.
Which area are you talking about? The one on the 487 West Street?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're both satisfied that the parking's available in these lots and that it'll serve the needs of the school?
Oh yes, much more space over there. There's no reason you need all of them anyway.
Okay, yeah, because really what we were trying to get at with this is to make sure that you have the parking that you need and that it's suitably located. So if that's the case.
What important is that the study that Kevin did actually speaks about a period of 3 or 4 years, I believe.
More.
Even more. And
Could you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry. I thought I speak loud enough.
No, it's for people at home.
Oh.
This is being televised.
Wow. Hi. I'm sorry. Sorry. The study that Kevin did is for about 3 or 4 years or 5 in the future. So at this point in time, at least what is the car line that right now it's working wonderfully. Definitely we have lots of space. When the school will be up to full capacity of 121 students, I believe, even then the parking space will be appropriate. But for now, we are trying to put the papers in place right now. So that's why it's in place.
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Yes, I have a question. I happen to live on Pomeroy Lane, so I go by. Yes, I'm your neighbor down the street.
Come and visit.
They're very good neighbors. You currently, while the building was under construction, the renovation, you were using I believe it's
7 Pomeroy.
7. Yes, you were using that space in that building for classes, children.
Street
There
mall.
was a fenced-in, playground. After the building is completed and opened, will you use that property for anything more than just parking? In other words, are you leasing the building anymore?
We have one unit over there. It is a storage, and my letter to Mr. Mora made very clear that that is a storage unit. No one will be there. The question was if someone will be in the storage, will this person take another parking space? And it's not. The 5 that we have. That strip mall has 40 parking spaces and 3 handicapped. There are 8 units, which means that 5 spaces for each unit. So when we are renting one unit, we get 5 parking spaces over there.
And I had a second question. You were talking about the longer-term plan. Your leases appear to be, at least the one I'm looking at, they're a year, 36 months, 3 years. And beyond that, do you feel like your longer-term plan, I mean, the school just has been renovated and had money put into it. Hopefully it will be there for a while. It happens to be in an up-and-coming village center, I might note. Should you, I guess it's maybe a hard question to project, but just about the future beyond 24 months or 36 months for parking, needed parking. Are you confident that that will be there, or you'll be able to secure other parking in the area?
I'll give you an answer based upon my 45 years experience in education before. Yes, it will be okay. It seems to me that they will also, the future school will also make sure that there will be nice and wonderful neighborhood relationships. We have the Kingdom Hall next to us, and I hope that they will provide support in the future. There's lots of parking over there. I would assume that the school and the church in the future will continue to cooperate and use even more space that it's way over there. So if you're a neighbor, please come and visit.
Thank you.
Hearing no more questions, I would ask for a motion that we, Amherst Montessori School has satisfied condition number 3 of their site plan review.
I'd make that motion, Mr. Chair. that they have-
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Mr. O'Keefe is seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thanks very much for coming in, and the best of luck to you.
Thank you.
Your expansion.
Please come and visit.
We will. Thank you.
Your opening. Thank you.
Moving right along is the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Let's see, the master plan calls for an implementation committee, and one has not yet been formed. It is supposed to have a planning board member on it. We had some discussion about this a little while ago, and we postponed making a decision about whether to try to get this fired up or not. Any comments on that tonight? Yes, Mr. Rosnoy.
I stand by my previous comments that the work that we do here on a regular basis is a way of implementing the master plan, that other committees as needed are formed, such as, for example, we heard from the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods. We have a task force on transportation, which is very much needed, but for some reason hasn't gotten off the back onto the tracks. There are a number of other committees that are addressing particular needs, and all of those are ways of implementing the master plan. So I see this as another layer of bureaucracy that, although it's well-intentioned, I don't think it's needed, and I think it overtaxes the citizen volunteer base of the town.
Can anyone here identify a pressing need for us to take action on this tonight? Mr. O'Keefe.
I guess I won't try to identify a pressing need for us to take action on it tonight, but I disagree with the sentiment that it's unnecessary and not needed. I think that the master plan represents a very important component of planning in this town that the town and many, many people worked for a long time on very hard. And it's important that we make sure that it is moving forward and that it doesn't just sit on the shelf. And having an implementation committee, I think, is an important part of that. The committee, as it's charged, wouldn't actually be doing much. They wouldn't be doing the implementation. They'd be keeping tabs on it, trying to coordinate other people, trying to report on the progress that's been made. So I guess I don't view it as a particularly onerous role to take on, but I do think that it's a worthwhile one, especially since we're still in the early phases of trying to get something going with the master plan.
Ms. Kruger.
I actually agree with what both the previous speakers said, the importance of the master plan, and that we maybe don't need another committee. And I'll just share, Saturday, Ms. Brestrup and I were both attendees at the Citizen Planner and Training Conference. It was in Worcester. And I went to a session that was, well, probably mangle the name, but it was something like planning retreats for master plan implementation. And it just took another tact on trying to get community involvement around master plan implementation. So it wasn't a committee. It involved, and I'll see if I can get this right, there were some joint meetings of different department heads in that town. I think the town was Westford. And then they planned a community event, and I think they had 2 events 2 years apart. And it really got people more invested in the master plan, and it was just a different way of coming at that. How do we keep tabs, and how do we continually sort of refresh our perspective on the master plan? And I might suggest that we could invite Angus Jennings was the town planner. He was presenting. He's now a consultant, and we could certainly get more information or have somebody like Mr. Jennings come and talk to us. So I liked the idea of reinvigorating community participation around our master plan, but it wasn't through the form of a committee. That just a different way of approaching.
Well, yes, Ms. Brestrup.
I had a question that came up, occurred to me today. What is the timeline for the master plan for renewing it? It was approved in 2010, in February of 2010. So is there and this I guess is a question for people who were on the committee and also for Mr. Tucker.
Yes, there is. Objective item 6 of the master plan says that the plan shall be formally updated on a 5-year basis. It doesn't say who shall do it or how they shall do it. It just says it shall be updated. It's nice passive voice, so it can be done any old way. Ms. Brestrup.
So I guess follow-up thought on that is, should you consider kind of starting that process again if it's supposed to be occurring in 5 years, and could the implementation committee be a vehicle to ease into sort of looking at the master plan and, you know, renewing it or re-establishing it or reinvigorating it for the next 5 years?
Mr.
That's
Tucker?
just a question.
I don't have an answer.
The master plan itself, the following strategy places the responsibility for designing a process by which the master plan will be updated with the planning board. You can determine when it is that you think you need to do that, but it does belong to you as advised by MPIC.
Darn.
Darn.
One way or another.
So, I like the brainstorming that's going on both for and against this process right now. Mr. Rosnoy, the master plan itself speaks against your position, but that doesn't mean that that's wrong.
Well, the master plan itself is advisory, Mr. Chairman.
Is it?
That's what I heard you say.
What are you, a lawyer? Okay, so I'm at a loss how to sort of lead this forward at this point. If somebody wants to step up, or more than one person who seem to be interested in it want to step up and start taking the initiative of forming a committee and getting the other parties involved and trying to move this forward, I'm in full support of that. I don't have a problem with it. Mr. Tucker?
One of the things that the board could do, short of beginning this process itself, although I don't necessarily disagree with Ms. Kruger's idea at all. I think that would be a very useful way to proceed. But if the Master Plan Implementation Committee was formed, one of the first tasks could be, and this would be a very usefully educative process, is working with the planning board or a subcommittee of the planning board on the next go-round, the next renewal of the plan. And what you have been spending the 5 years since the planning process was finished, it took then another 2 or 3 years until you actually adopted the plan. So the plan was adopted in 2010, February, and it's only 3 years currently that you've spent trying to implement, and you ran into a couple of not immovable rocks or immutable forces, but you ran into the housing situation, which has complicated very powerfully your attempts to implement the most important parts of the master plan having to do with rezoning village centers to try and reform the way in which the community develops. We're beginning to make progress on that, but I think it's not too early to start talking about when is the next time we need to update the master plan. And one of the ways to do that is if the board were to say to the select board, go ahead and appoint the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Here's our sacrificial victim, our volunteer member to that body, and one of our recommendations is that the MPEC start immediately talking about and thinking about how to update this, in addition to taking stock of the current status of the implementation of the master plan. Because we're at 3 years by the time we're done appointing this committee and working on that process. You know how Amherst process takes, how long it takes. If we hope to update it in 5 years, or on 5 years, rather than begin updating it on at the 5-year interval, starting now is not a mistake.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Well, it strikes me that such a committee, you know, I've seen 2 sort of successful short-term committees come through that were designed with specific objectives in mind rather than ongoing duties. The first being the Puffers Pond 2020 Committee, which I had the good fortune to serve on, which was, I felt very successful, and also now the Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group has done a great job in a short period of time to complete a particular task. I know that also there's other boards that some of you sit on that are doing similar things that were put together for particular purposes. It seems to me that the Master Plan Implementation Committee might be designed along the same lines, to be task-oriented rather than sort of ongoing. So it could be a committee with a duration and a goal to complete an assessment and revision of the master plan through, I think the charge probably says this, but to do it, prior to 2015, sort of setting a deadline for it, like Mr. Tucker said. Maybe we should revisit this after we've had a chance to chew on it. Ms. Anderson.
A comment. Mr. Rosnoy and I had the pleasure of being on the implementation committee for the transportation aspect of the master planning committee, and maybe that is, I don't think it left a very good, the committee just sort of died. We did some work, it was a good small group, but it was sort of an ad hoc, we had a purpose, and it wasn't, a great big global thing, but we got to a point of getting a bid for consultants, and that just didn't turn out to be successful. Lack of consultants or lack of meeting the needs within a budget, and it might still even be listed on our as a report, but hopefully I see someone has a comment on that, but that's just I don't know where that is, and that was just one aspect, was not the whole thing, it was just the transportation section of the master plan, which was promising.
Go ahead, Mr. Rosny.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. I think Ms. Brestrup will have some update on something that might actually be happening on that group. And I appreciate your comments about what might be the source of my frustration. However, at the risk of sounding even more heretical, I think it's more deeply based and goes to the root of the master plan itself. And I've been much chagrined to see the master plan used by various proponents or opponents of any particular issue that comes before us. And I think it started a number of years back in my tenure on this board, when somebody comes before us and wants to propose an amendment to our bylaws in the name of improving a residential neighborhood in a way that they lean on the master plan to say that it says one thing, and then somebody else comes in and wants to do something exactly opposite, and they pick a different part of the master plan. So the master plan is very amenable to being cherry-picked for whatever reason any particular advocate or opponent wants to use it. And it's very disconcerting in that way. So to see some sort of an implementation committee meant to advance the master plan, I just don't know which parts of the master plan this implementation committee might be looking at. A second comment I have along those lines is I don't think that many of us here are aware of the groundswell of illegitimacy the master plan has amongst perhaps a sizable minority of the population, because it was only approved by the planning board, that it was not officially approved by town meeting. I don't know if that can be addressed, if maybe in this process that particular aspect of it could be addressed. But there is a feeling, I think, amongst a sizable minority of our town that this board has sort of just adopted something and never had to report to town meeting where it could have real review, so to speak. I'm not advocating that it should have been, but I'm just sort of expressing what I think is an impression of the master plan and its function.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosnoy. Mr. O'Keefe.
I think it's worth pointing out that under state law, the local agency that's responsible and charged with adaptation of the master plan is the planning board, not town meeting. So we had no legal alternative.
You and I know that. We all know that.
So I'm just saying that perception of illegitimacy is, I'm aware that it's out there also, but I don't find any alternative to the course that we took. So that's the way that it is.
Ms. Brestrup?
I've had some discussions with the other staff liaison, Guilford Mooring, and also with the town manager about the transportation task force. And the town manager has asked us to get things moving again, particularly with regard to making sure that the people who are currently or were on the task force want to be reappointed, and he intends to reappoint them and to move forward with this. And I've heard from Mr. Mooring that he is ready, almost ready, to reissue the RFP. So we're working on it. And the town manager is supportive of the task force.
A quick side note, and I won't get into the swamp about whether people think the master plan is legitimate or whether the 3,000 different versions of interpretation of the random survey mean one thing is legitimate or another. The master plan anticipates, and if you look at, in particular, the language that accompanies the land use policy map, it anticipates that the community is not going to agree with itself, and that whenever, and since the process itself was interrupted, and the size of the body that was trying to work the master plan was doubled, and they had to go through another process. But one of the pieces that did not get done, and I think it may have been an unrealistic expectation in the first place, was that the entire town would be planned and rezoned and everybody would know where everything was going to go, which would have been an epic battle. What's happening instead is we're having epic small battles every time we look at a village center. All of the inherent conflicts between change and not change, and I'm afraid of students, and I love students, and this is an environmental disaster versus the environmental regulations already protect everything in sight or protect too much. That will all come out every single time. And the master plan anticipated that and said each time you have to go through this process, you have to consider all of these issues. There's a reason why you can cherry pick anything you want, because everything that anybody would want is in there. That's the intent. And the intent is that it's a process that you blessedly get to carry forward and help the community try and resolve each time for each place where you're trying to decide in a more final sense what is the range of possibility for the future for this place. That's what it does.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. In the interest of time, I think we should move on. We'll revisit this. Let's put it on the agenda. Well, that actually brings us to our next item, unless we have any topics not reasonably anticipated under old business, which is the planning board schedule. And we have meetings coming up on April 3rd and April 17th, and town meeting starts on May 6th. So we are right up against it. Let's start with, before we forget, let's decide when to revisit this master plan implementation committee. Do we want to try to come at it again before town meeting? Because we can just put it on for another short discussion at our next meeting. Does anybody objects? Let's put it on and we can just skip over it if we need to. So we have a question mark for public hearings on April 3rd. We would be looking at what for that day?
Fraternity housing?
Yeah, so it's too late to get a public hearing for the 3rd, I think, right? It's too late for that. The timing is not right. So we're looking at 2 public hearings remaining, one for fraternity residents, dimensional changes, and one for non-conforming lots or structures. So 2 public hearings, presumably on the 17th.
Excuse me,
Yes, Ms. Brestrom.
would you repeat what you just said?
One public hearing for fraternity residents dimensions, and one for non-conforming lots or structures.
It's related to form-based code?
Yes. Yeah, take it over. And I assume that we would want to have those on the 17th.
So, fraternity residents and the non-conforming. That sounds like it could work. Those are both fairly short. You can easily get through 2 of those, right? So let's put those both on for the 17th unless anybody's opposed. Mark your calendars. Moment. And then there was also going to be the Article 9 revision, the parking, or no, the non-conforming,
Right, that's the second or the first article, maybe that should be
Oh,
the first
okay.
article, but yeah.
all right, not the technical fix that we did already.
We already did that, yes.
Excuse me. Does everyone understand what you were saying when you were talking about the non-conforming structures?
I don't know.
It's taking the last 3 pages from the form-based design regulations and rewording it and putting it into section 9.
All right, so that's, if you have your list of potential zoning bylaw amendment priorities, which I know you carry with you at all times, the first item on there is form-based design regulations, and we're talking about taking just a piece of that.
Right.
Correct?
Form-based design regulations for non-conforming structures.
And we are talking about having that public hearing
Oh, I see.
on the 17th, right?
Now I understand the confusion. Okay. Sorry about
Okay. Because we had another
Right.
permitting for non-conforming properties, which we approved. And I don't have the date that we did the public hearing on, but we did approve it.
I believe that was on
6th.
6th of March, yes.
Oh, that was because I wasn't here, so I wasn't.
That's right.
All right, was there, yes, Ms. Brestrup?
The Unitarian Church did submit their site plan review application, and I was hoping to schedule their public hearing for April 17th. Would you like me to, well, they would actually like to get their building permit in May, so. Would you be able to have the 2 zoning amendments, public hearings, and then have the Unitarian Church public hearing that night?
I think we can do that.
Which night is that?
The 17th of April. It's a Wednesday.
Good, thank you.
And may I say one more thing? I actually do not have anything on April 3rd right now. We thought we might have zoning amendments that night, but they would have had to have been advertised last Friday. And Mr. Laverdier's property, we're still puzzling about what's going on with that, so we didn't advertise that. So there's currently no public hearing scheduled for April 3rd.
Mr. Tucker?
What you can do is, instead of holding public hearings, you can segue, as you have been with the zoning issues, from the zoning subcommittee meeting prior to discussion of the 2 remaining amendments, and spend some time on that, in addition to the master plan, which is on the list.
Yes,
Question
Ms.
for
Kruger.
staff. Before we get to the public hearing on the fraternity zone, will different representatives at the university be well informed that we're going ahead with that, so they can be part of that?
We can inform them.
I know they might not want to.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, do we need to schedule anything for May at this point? Crowner. Your
I'd like
hand
to
went up
schedule some things
quickly.
for April.
What's that?
I would like to schedule some things for April.
Oh, please do.
That's, the warrant review is April 23rd. Bus tour is April 28th. And there'll be precinct meetings between the warrant review and the start of town meeting, so the next week and a half.
So for those of us at home who might not speak town meeting, could you explain what those things are?
So the warrant review is just a short summary of all of the articles that are on the warrant. a chance to ask clarifying questions, basically.
For who to ask them?
It's presented by the TMCC and League of Women Voters, and the moderator, and it's open to the public. It's televised, so anyone can come in and ask a question about one of the articles. The bus tour is, they rent a bus, and they TMCC rents a bus and takes you around to sites that have relevance to articles that are on the warrant, so that you have a visual of what we're talking about. I don't know where they're going to go, but I assume that they might circle around North Amherst and various other zoning districts.
Sort of like a party bus.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly like a
Road
party
trip.
bus. And then the precinct meetings are just very small scale warrant reviews. Really, they're led by TMCC members, and it's just a chance for the members of a precinct to get together and discuss the articles. And it's very helpful to have a planning board member at that to answer questions. It's not supposed to be a time for arguing about it. That's often what happens, though. So you have to be prepared for that. But it's intended to be a time to just say, this is what the article is. You know, are there any clarifying questions? And it's difficult for one person to do all of them, as I have done in the past.
Ms. Anderson?
How many articles are the planning board presenting exactly?
Well, by my count, we have 6. We will have 6.
Could you just
Sure.
bullet those?
Yep. I'm just going to go in the order that I have them on my paper. 1, the amendment to the form-based design regulations for pre-existing non-conforming properties, which we have not discussed yet. 2, the business LB and commercial district amendments for mixed use. 3, the dimensional requirement changes and maximum and minimum height. 4, the fraternity residence. 5, converted dwellings, resolving the conflict between Articles 14 and 17 that we created last time. 5, no, that was 5. 6 is the 400 Main Street rezoning, but we're not actually bringing that one. So that makes 5.
Thank you.
Is that right? Yeah.
Ms. Brestrup.
Excuse me.
Yes, Ms. Brestrup.
I think there's another one, non-conforming
Yes.
structures.
Technical
The
fix.
building commissioner came and spoke.
Oh,
with the planning
Technical
about
did I
it.
skip over that? I'm sorry. Yeah, I have it here, but it's the one that I wasn't here for, so I'm skipping it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
That's right.
6.
6 that are yours and 1 that's a petition.
And that's plenty. Even though one of them is only 3 letters. And they're little.
So,
Small font.
may I just clarify something? What was it that you determined that you would like to discuss on April 3rd? Mr. Tucker made a suggestion.
Mr. Tucker did make a suggestion, but we didn't rule on his
exactly sure.
suggestion.
The 2 remaining amendments that you are working on and will hold a hearing on the 17th, which is the fraternity residence dimensions, if there's anything further to be said about that, and the Article 9 change.
I think we'll need to spend some time on the Article 9 change anyway, because it's not really, I mean, you'll be making changes right before that meeting, I assume, and if not next week, if you meet. Brestrup?
And then one other thing that I know of that's coming up is that the housing production plan is almost finished, and apparently the select board and the planning board need to approve it before it goes to the state. So when I spoke with Nate Malloy, he said that perhaps sometime in early May, they may be ready to present it to you. So I would tentatively schedule that for May 1st, if that's all right with you.
Yes, Mr. Rosner.
A question about that. Did we once discuss having a sort of a status report to town meeting on that? Recognizing it wouldn't be done and ready to present to town meeting for spring. But I thought we discussed that once, and as a way of keeping everyone involved, aware of what's happening with that report.
I think that the housing production plan will be ready to discuss with town meeting, but the housing market study will not be ready, and perhaps Mr. Tucker could address that issue.
I think the housing market study, many of the results will be ready in some kind of a preliminary survey, a summary, single sheet or something like that could be available for town meeting members. The report itself will probably not be ready.
It would be extremely helpful to some of our amendments to have an executive summary, I think.
Yep.
Or if I may, or even one of the early articles allows for reports for issues that are, Article 1, that are not complete yet. I don't know who would be appropriate, whether the chair or one of the staff, but it would seem to be an important thing to present to town meeting, just that it's happening and what the status of it is.
Do we have a representative on that, don't we? Is it?
Yeah, Mr. O'Keefe, I think.
Let me-
You'll do it?
You're talking about the housing production
The housing,
plan?
do we have?
Well,
is that-
sort of both parts of it.
I,
Both parts of it is what I'm thinking.
The housing production plan will be available online within a week or so. And the executive summary could be copied and sent out to town meeting members in the first mailing. That's not an issue. An executive summary or a preliminary summary of the conclusions of the housing market study could certainly be available, for handing out, or possibly the second mailing to town meeting members. It might be worth trying to do some kind of a summary statement, a report on the conclusions of the two under Article 1.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, yes.
Yeah.
The written
Partly
material would be good, but...
partly to establish the context for a number of things. Mr. Jackson, made a point of saying, of stating his opinion, which I think is accurate, that part of the problem here, and you've heard me say it too, is that there's insufficient housing, period, for anybody. And until there's a more substantial housing stock that provides opportunities for housing for folks beyond the student market in Amherst, many of the problems will continue because they're a symptom of that shrunken stock. So if as seems likely, the conclusions of these two studies, the housing production plan and the market study, say that, and we have the numbers, it would be very useful, I think, under Article 1 for someone to get up there with a couple of slides and say, here's what it says, here's the context for the following articles that are going to be coming up.
yeah, I'd be willing to do that if needed, but I would definitely want some guidance from the board and from staff on what to say.
Excuse me. Wouldn't we want to find out if the Housing and Sheltering Committee was planning to report to town meeting on the housing production plan? But I agree that a summary of those two studies is very relevant as a context or a preamble to some of what we're doing. So I just wonder, instead of the planning board reporting to town meeting under Article 1, if it should be part of our introductory remarks to the zoning piece when we get to that. So just
I think that's a political question that we don't need to resolve tonight.
I'm happy to have you do it.
I'm happy to have you do it, Connie.
I'm happy to work with you on it, David.
Great, these are all good points, and it's hard to fit all these pieces of the puzzle together. But really what we were talking about was the schedule. And so we had Mr. Crowner suggest that we discuss delegates or some such to the warrant review, bus tour, and precinct meetings. And I think that's a good idea to discuss that on the April 3rd meeting. Anybody object to that? Let's put it on the agenda.
David?
Yes, Mr.
I have
Carson.
a question for the staff. Are there any citizen petitions that we're supposed to either have a public hearing on or take a vote on?
We will, as a standard practice, bring you a copy of the warrant as soon as we have it, at least in draft form, including petition articles and so forth. There are, for instance, a couple of petition articles which speak to alternatives to the rental regulations bylaw that you voted to support this evening. And there are some others as well. So yes, you will have that at one of your upcoming meetings, either the 3rd or the 17th, depending on when it is finished in a complete form at the manager's office. And we'll bring it to you for your review and decision about what you want to say about any of it.
Well, April 3rd would probably be the day for that. Ms. Brestrup?
If you're interested, I have an email from Dave Zomek that has all of the petition articles attached to it, so I could forward that to you, and you would have a preview of those articles.
That would be excellent. Thank you. All right, moving on. Any new topics not reasonably anticipated prior to this meeting, anyone? Cherry Hill Golf Course is tragically late to open this year.
What's that? Sure, what?
Any A&Rs tonight?
No A&Rs.
No A&Rs. Upcoming ZBA applications?
I do have upcoming ZBA applications. I have one, Metro PCS would like to modify conditions for wireless telecommunication equipment on the top of Clark House. You interested in that? Hassan's Barn down in South Amherst. A special permit to structurally alter the exterior of an existing non-conforming building. Oh, it's in a residential district, yes. No? Dory Goldman would like to set up a home occupation bakery on Ward Street.
Ward Street.
If samples are
Ward
involved.
Street. It's out on Pelham Road. It's off Pelham Road, just before you get to Pelham, as a matter of fact.
No, I don't think so.
No? Okay. And Afterburner, which is also called Wings Over Amherst, it's associated with the hangar, wants to create a delivery-only Class 2 restaurant at the University Drive Big Y Shopping Plaza. The only change there, exterior-wise, is going to be signs, so I think you'll get to see the signs in any event. So, interested in that, other than signs? No? Okay, that's it then.
Thank you very much. Committee reports, PVPC.
Nothing.
CPAC.
CPAC finished.
Microphone.
Yes, the microphone. What I thought I'd do is take the hopefully easy-to-read spreadsheet, email it to Chris, and you can see it. Highlights. I'll just give you quickly because of the hour. There are, I'm going to round the numbers, 600,011, 611, comma, 00, amount to spend that we're spending, and actually in the budget, and we're only spending 588,000 and leaving a reserve of 24,000, round numbers. 611 minus 588 is 24. We have everything from open space to Emily Dickinson's dress. That's a very important aspect of Amherst. But what did I do? Instead of reading all this, I'll just pass it along as we're talking. It's very interesting. If you have any questions, let me know. I love CPAC. It's a great committee. It's one of those committees, you have a purpose, you do your stuff, you have your hearings, it's over, it's done, and it does not meet again until the Actually, the chair, Peter Jessup, who's excellent, will present that at town meeting. CPAC only recommends to town meeting. They don't make the decision. So, but there's, and the law requires that you put at least 10% into each of the categories, which is affordable housing, open space recreation, and historic preservation. So that's easy, usually easy to meet. But we started out with 1.1 million in requests. And it's, a lot of things were withdrawn, some things were whittled down, some just got a no. And others, and there's about 4 items at the bottom that are debt service as you read that spreadsheet, which is like year 3 of 10 of something. So those are already, you start minus that. Yes?
Brunel property, Potwine Lane, can you
Yeah.
just give a brief cap of what that is?
Open space preservation on Potwine, and it's the owners.
So it's conservation.
It's conservation, that's right. The owners give the town first refusal,
No, I just-
giving a very good, actually below-market deal for the town, and it's highly recommended by Dave Zomek as he comes and makes a presentation to us. So that'll be an excellent acquisition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Agricultural Commission is me. The Agricultural Commission met last week. There was a lively discussion about farmers markets and the upcoming season, possibly trying to expand the farmers market out in front. They continue to work towards a new set of priorities and how they're going to move forward. ARA,
No report.
Sign Review Board.
We met last week, and I did not bring my piece of paper, but I will describe to you that there is going to be a very significant and solid sculpture of a cow that is going to be placed on the corner of the carrot shops where the Amherst Wine sign is. It's going to be on the other corner by the Loose Goose, and it's part of an effort to, it's going to be a promotional thing to help raise, to have events that are associated. Excuse me, Ms. Brestrup, can you remember the name of the?
Counterfeit Cow Productions.
That's it, Counterfeit Cow Productions, okay. So there is an image associated with this cow that will become kind of a branding thing that will get associated with fundraising. And this cow is, it's almost life-size, and it's going to be out of steel, like hard steel. It's going to be indestructible. It's going to be really interesting. I mean, everybody's...
Conforming or a non-conforming cow?
Yeah, really, exactly. Yes, questions?
Is it a permanent installation or is it a temporary installation?
No, it's permanent,
Yeah.
definitely permanent. So,
Like Durgan Park?
what's that?
Like Durgan Park?
Yeah, something like that, yeah, right. So, stay tuned.
That's very interesting, thank you. Housing and Sheltering Committee.
No report, they haven't met since we met last.
And Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group. If you have anything to add.
None, that it was a great group. I had to miss a few meetings, but Dave led us very well through, at one point, I think there were 18 people on the committee trying to write a document. So all the kudos are well-deserved. It was, the town manager was there on a number of occasions, and actually town council was there on 1 or 2 occasions, just to help. Instead of having to say, well, we have to ask council and come back, he was right there to help us. So it was great. But it's an ad hoc group, and it's over.
Not quite.
Well, not quite. Town meeting. It has town meeting, and then it might have to go back and tweak a little bit. Who knows?
But yeah, kudos for sure. I have no report of the chair. Any report from staff?
I have no report.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to Amherst Media. We are adjourned.
You want this back?
Thank you, sir.
I think the second